Hello everyone and welcome to another really nice game from the semifinals of the WR ChessMasters Cup 2024. For those of you who don't remember, last year I mentioned it. It's called the WR ChessMasters Cup as it's founded by Vadim Rosenstein, a German entrepreneur. So, in case you were wondering, to, bring together some strong chess players and promote chess a little bit. Now let's check it out. Interestingly, before this game and before this event, they've only faced each other, Arjun and Pragg, 3 times in classical. Once Pragg was victorious, once Arjun was victorious, and one game ended in a draw. So this one is pretty big. This is the first game as they play 2 games, so let's check it out. Arjun with white opens with pawn to e4. We have pawn to e5, knight f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. Arjun goes for the Ruy Lopez, pawn to a6, Morphy's defense, bishop a4, and b5. The pretty standard stuff here. We have bishop to b3, knight to a5, attacking the bishop. This is the so-called Karo Norwegian variation. We have castles, and now pawn to d6. So switching the move order a little bit, we have rook e1, knight captures, a captures, and now there are only a handful of games that reach this position where pawn to c5 was played. But here we have pawn to g5, and it is now as of move 8 that we have a completely new game. So Pragg is saying, okay, this is the first game, I'm gonna go wild with the black pieces and hope for the best. And of course his next move is g4, and Arjun has to figure out what to do about this. He plays pawn to d3, doesn't think too much about it, spends some 2 minutes on this position. Pawn to g4, knight to d2, and queen to f6. Probably the other pawn will now start marching forward. Knight to c3, preparing knight to d5 to go after the queen. So pawn to c6. You have to, also check what your opponent is doing. You can't just make moves for yourself. That's not how chess works. And now we have knight to f1. Here Arjun spent some 4 minutes, but I'm just going to show you one line. And this is pretty much the only line where I will deviate a bit longer because it's beautiful. Pawn to f4. So what do you make of this? Well, the idea is that if g captures, knight captures, and you've fixed all of your problems, you're going to bring the rook back to f1 and enjoy the semi-open f-file. But if pawn captures, you're going to sacrifice another pawn because the king is still on e8. And after pawn captures, you will play d4. And now, of course, further capturing is impossible. So Pragg would have to play something like bishop to g7 or move the queen, and then after you could also capture with the rook. D captures on e5 is a bit more precise, as you also want to create some very strong squares for the knight. And if pawn to f3, knight d to e4, and after bishop to e7, controlling the f6 square, now you will play something like queen to d4, and it's a really wild position. It's still playable for both white and black, but probably bishop e6 to stop e6, and okay, maybe white is even the one who's pushing, but it's really crazy, and I believe, well, with this crazy time format, not maybe that interesting for Arjun. And Pragg definitely isn't one you want to go against in these crazy positions, as Pragg is tactically just there's no one he hasn't swindled in a crazy position. So knight to f1, we have knight to e7 and bishop to e3. We have bishop to g7 and queen to d2. Okay, nicely developing. Have to be a little bit careful not to run into some bishop g5 ideas. We have rook to g8, not rook to g8, rook to b8 first, and now rook e to d1. You could also try some other ideas like knight to e2, preparing pawn to d4 right away. Also isn't that terrible, but Arjun prepares it a bit differently. He plays rook e to d1, we have bishop, queen to g6, and now pawn to d4 right away. Okay, castles kingside, Pragg gets his king to safety, captures, but not with the pawn. Bishop captures on e5. Pawn captures would also be interesting. The problem with pawn captures is this bishop to c5 maneuver, and now if you play something like rook to e8, you can play captures, and after queen captures, queen to d8 with check, so all sorts of nasty stuff is possible. Bishop captures on e5, but now bishop to f4. Arjun says, all right, the d6 pawn is weak, and we're gonna make this game about that. Pragg starts attacking on the king side, but Arjun just trades down. Bishop captures, pawn captures, and queen to d6. If you allowed Pragg 2 moves, then Arjun would be in trouble, but after queen to d6, a queen trade is mandatory. Otherwise, Pragg would lose material. So queen captures on d6, we have rook captures, and now bishop to e6. So it's a very interesting decision by Pragg, leaving the a6 pawn unattended like this, maybe, improving your position a bit first, but okay. Pragg wants to go for activity. He plays bishop to e6. Arjun says, all right, I will have your a6 pawn. We have rook to a8, captures, captures, and pawn to f3. We have captures, captures, and king to g7. Now Pragg gets the king into the game. King to f2. Arjun does the same. And rook to a1. Pragg would like to enjoy his, back rank, as he did sacrifice a pawn for it, but Arjun says, nope, I don't think so. Rook to d1. And you might think, okay, I just sacrificed a pawn for activity. Of course, I'm not going to trade, but that is exactly what Pragg does. For some reason, the engine actually thinks it's perfectly fine to capture and to move the rook back, even evaluates it completely the same, but I don't know. At my level, if I'm down a pawn, I want material on the board. But Pragg is very objective. He just trades, captures, captures, and now pawn to f5. We have e captures on f5, bishop captures, and now the dance of the knight begins. Knight to d3, knight d to e3, attacks the bishop, and bishop back to g6. So can Arjun push for something? He's up a pawn and he has the two knights, but again, it's game on both sides of the board. Maybe Pragg's bishop will be enough to hold the position. Knight to g3, king to f6, and pawn to h4. A bit committal, but okay, it's a dark square. Pragg has a light square bishop, and the knight will have, first you have to move the bishop, then the knight has to come here if you are to threaten this, and by that time you can easily get the king into the game. So it's not as if Pragg is winning this pawn anytime soon. We have knight to c8, king to e2, and knight to d6. We have king to d2, and knight to b7. We have king to c3, knight to c5, and king to b4. Kicking away the knight, trying to gain access to those queenside pawns. Knight to e6, and now pawn to c3. You also want to limit your opponent's counterplay, because knight to d4 would be very annoying. So pawn to c3, king to e7, and now knight to e4. And Pragg says, all right, now it's time to trade. Bishop captures on e4, f captures, and king to d6. Probably keeping the bishop on the board would be a bit more precise, but okay, objectively this should be a draw. But you're down a pawn. It's knight 5 pawns versus 4 pawns. You know that the other guy is playing for the win. Knight to f5 with check. We have king to c7 and knight to g3, going after the h5 pawn, and just knight f4. Pragg nicely defends it. We have king to a5, knight to g2, going after the h4 pawn, knight to f5 defending, and now knight to e1. We have pawn to c4, b captures, and knight to f3. Again, putting pressure on h4, preventing Arjun's knight from moving. Pawn to c5, grabbing more space, and knight to d2. Again, attacking e4, and again, knight to g3, defending and attacking the pawn on h5. And here, Pragg plays king to b7, and this drops the ball for him. Here, up until this point, it's still playable, it's a draw, but you have to play knight to c4 check. Point being that after, let's say, king b4, attacking the knight, you will capture this pawn, and after Arjun captures the h5 pawn, you will be just in time to defend it. Knight e3 check, for example, king to c4, you'll play knight to f2, attack this pawn, and after knight defends it and frees up the h file for the h pawn. Now you bring the king in, for example, h5, king to e7, even knight to d7, because the king cannot capture the pawn with queen, but you don't care, you're just going to capture on e4, and after knight captures on e5, king f8, and okay, now it's a draw. You can even sacrifice the knight for the pawn and pick up this pawn, in some lines, so it's not going to be difficult. But king to b7 is what Pragg played, and now Arjun strikes with, I don't have to tell you, pawn to b4. It is the only winning move, but it always is, so it's not very hard to find. Knight to b3 check, king to a4, and now knight to d4, but now knight captures on h5 is very much different. With knight to f3, and now knight to f6. b5 is the most precise way to play, or knight to g7. With knight to f6, he kind of allows Pragg back into the game. Knight captures on h4, pawn to b5, and now knight to f3. We have pawn to b6 and knight to g5. Now, again, putting pressure on e4, king to a5, and now knight to e6, putting pressure on the c5 pawn, king before defending, and again, knight g5, defending the e4 pawn. We have king to c4 and king to a6. Here, again, it's still playable, it's still a draw. But Pragg has to play king to c8 or king to b8 to be in time to prevent knight to d7. But he played king to a6, and now it's again winning for Arjun. He plays king to d3, we have knight to e6, and now knight to d7. We have king to b7, now you have to bring the king back to kick away the knight. King to c4, and now knight to g5. Again, attacking the pawn. Knight captures on e5, knight captures on e4, and now only one move is winning here, but I'm pretty sure you guys see it. Knight to f7 to be in range of the check. We have knight to d2 check, king to b4, and king to c8, stopping knight to d7. But you don't care. You can get grab hold of the b7 square even via the a5 square. So knight to e5. We have king to b7. Just repeating. Knight to c4. We have knight to e4, and if you trade, of course, it's winning 2 versus 1. So knight to a5 check. We have king to a6, and now knight captures on c6. There is no way for you to defend the pawn, so you might as well give it up. Knight to f6. We have king to a4, strongest move, preparing to once again kick away the black king. Knight to e4, going after the pawn here, and now knight to b4 with check. King to b7. King to b5, threatening pawn to c5 check. Now knight to c3, we have king to a5, and he was in this position on move 70 that Praggnanandhaa resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. The pawn is defended, there are no more checks. Next move c6 is coming, and well, there's no way for you to do any damage here. There's no way for the knight to do anything. There's no way for the king to do anything. Even knight a6 check. You can even play b7, bring a queen into the game. It's very, very easily winning. So yeah, after king a5, Pragg resigns, and a very, very nice victory for Arjun, who not only won the first game, but also got a draw in the second game, where he was black, and that means he wins the match, and he will face, well, the winner of the match, Alireza versus MVL, which also finished, but it finished in Armageddon. I'm gonna show you a part of that game. Just give me a second, let me load this up. Yeah, this is the sorry, this is the position. There we go. And it's a pretty wild one. c3 was played, and now knight to h5. And it makes sense that MVL wants to play knight to h5, because look at the position. Alireza's rook is on f1. The bishop is guarding the rook, but MVL has these nasty pawns that are, well, almost ready to queen. And he wants to play knight to g3 to attack Alireza's rook. And what Alireza should play is knight to c2. The reason being that after knight to g3 is played, he will just take the e3 pawn with the knight, and once MVL captures the rook, the knight will also capture the knight on f1. And then the bishop will be defending the knight, and you don't have to worry. This pawn will be gone, and this pawn can never be promoted. And then Alireza just starts advancing his 3 connected pass pawns on the queen side, and it's an easy win. And he was winning for the entire game, and this is already move 36, so it's very heartbreaking what happened to him. He actually played pawn to b4, as Alireza always does. He's famous for, you know, always playing pawn to b4. Now MVL just played knight to g3, and after rook to c1, he just played rook captures on c1, and he was in this position on move 38 that Alireza resigned, as there is nothing more to be done here. Once the rook is captured, you will just play pawn to e2, and that's it. If the knight captures, then the bishop is no longer guarding the f1 square. You will just queen the pawn, and after e2, if bishop captures, you will just capture it, and then once knight captures, again f1 queen, and that's completely winning. So yeah, we will have Arjun versus Alireza in the finals of the WR ChessMasters Cup. So MVL versus Arjun, and yeah, looking forward to it very much. It's going to be a really, really wild finale. But yeah, I mean, okay, you've seen how wild the game it was. Like I said, they've only played 3 classical games in their entire life in, you know, official competition. And now after 2 more games have been played, now it's Arjun who has the lead over Pragg, and Pragg will have to look for a bounce back at some point. But yeah, had Arjun won the second game as well, he would have broken 2800, but it was a draw, so he lost some rating, and he's still quite there, just not quite yet. I'm sure he will, very quickly. If he beats MVL, he's breaking 2800. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to wish a very happy birthday to Danush, and I would like to thank Ivan Sterling, Jos van Verd, Gianpaolo Londono, and BulletChessThriller.com for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.